From Washington, D.C., welcome to the Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin and Bob Marks.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your host, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
This week's Alumni Show is brought to you by Bill Houghton, insuring standardbreds and farms for over 40 years. Bill knows the ins and outs of equine insurance. Make sure your equine investments are protected. Call or text Bill at 954-655-5547. That's 954-655-5547. Call Bill now.
Freddie, tell us about the yearlings at the sales by Huntington Farms.
Huntington Farms, selling their 2021 yearlings at the Lexington Select Sale, October 5th through the 9th, and the Harrisburg Sale, November 8th through the 12th. For more information, call 859-987-3983, Huntington Farms, or email huntingtonfarm@cs.com. Joining us today is Standardbred owner, journalist, fan, and gambler, Dean Towers. Dean, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here, actually, talking to y'all.
Dean, in your Harness Racing update column, you wrote what might be considered a controversial article entitled, "Wait Till Next Week Needs to Go." Could you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, it was an article, I was thinking about it a bit. It's a common complaint, I guess, in harness racing are the lack of competitive races, and then Jeff Garrell put that press release out regarding the Meadowlands driver meeting. They were going to have some chats, I think, about holes, and turned out to be about holes and less competitive racing. So I decided to write a little something on it, and mainly about, really it was about the things we're seeing in some stakes racing, but also at the higher levels. You notice the free-for-all level will often get a cheap half. It's almost like you go this week, we'll go next week, in that upper level, and those are our races that Bob talks about moving earlier in the card, our better horses. It's kind of our showcase events, and we would see a lot of sleepy halves and not much movement. So it was mainly about that. And, the Grand Circuit, there's differences in the Grand Circuit, and I know you folks have been watching harness racing for a long time, and you might want to, you could probably talk about this better than I grew up with it in the 80s, but the stakes racing back in the 80s, or the hopper level racing, it seemed it was more competitive. You'd have a different array of drivers. You'd have 8 or 10 horses with 8 or 10 different owners and 8 or 10 different barns. Even in stakes racing, the North America Cup or the Windy City, the Meadowlands Pace, it seemed horses would ship from all over, and you might get the local driver come with the horse. It seemed there was a lot more activity. It seemed that more horses were in there to win that week. And what we're seeing in the Grand Circuit with all the drivers traveling together and all the same horses, it just doesn't seem the same. And I think Jeff Garrell's point, and the point of many, is there's just this, let's go this week in this graduate leg, but we'll take next week off. Well, the bettors don't really know if you're taking the next week off. So that was the impetus for it in general.
Yeah, because, I know that when I was racing, Trade, you can verify this, was, if certain people had an inside post and they left, they were parking you. They were not letting you go. They would run you right down to the half. They'd run you down the whole mile. And other guys in the race would respect that, and a lot of times they wouldn't leave against them because of that reason right there. And I haven't seen someone parked in a long time. But moving along, in the ABC system, and currently with the condition racing, they have the same problem. And how do we fix it? How do we fix this problem?
Yeah, amazing. Is that's the old days too. Is the same to drop and pop or whatever. I don't know if you can without doing anything completely, draconian. You think about it. The fix is paying the top 3 or telling people they can only race twice a month, so they're going to try to get a bigger piece of the purse to pay the bill. That's all ridiculous, more or less, or certainly hard, even if it did work. I think we can handicap it a lot. harness racing is short prices, and that's what drop-in pops are, short prices. It's just weirdly today that the short prices, the drop-in pops are they're paying $2 to $5, and the way the conditioned races are written, for example, at the Meadowlands, if you drop into that, the lowest by far conditioned race, you're against 5 claimers, really. It's a 5 claimer, and the second lowest is a 10. So you've got 10 claimers dropping into 5 claimers, which is a massive, massive drop historically in harness racing that results in a horse that's 3 to 1 at the 10 claimer level will be 1 or 2 to 5 in the 5 claimer. So it's really discombobulating the odds board. It's more prevalent than ever, I think. It's worse than ever. Fixing it just seems so difficult because guys are going to drop. Guys are going to want to get the lines off, and guys are going to drop. I think it's a whole part and parcel of the speed game. You might be able to do something with TrackMaster classifications. There was a letter to Harness Racing Update last week in response to my column talking about the TrackMaster rating system. I think if the race office got together and classified conditioned horses that want to race in those races and just go up and down the ladder, classified them better where there's less incentive to wait to drop, I think that can work. Bob, you might have an idea or two on that, working so much in the game, in the race office, and handicapping. But that's the only way I can see, other than completely draconian things that we certainly don't want to do.
Correct. As in elimination races, do you think we should have a disclaimer, basically telling the betting public that a lot of these horses are just trying to qualify for next week and they may not be given 100% effort?
Now, that's wild that we would have to do that, wouldn't it be? The big talk, that was a big topic, and that was actually that happened the day after the Meadowlands Pace eliminations, where Perfect Sting and Travis Alexander's colt, American Courage, beautiful horses, obviously. They were large favorites in that elimination, but we've seen that a lot. You can do that. I think that's fine. I think I'd probably look at this issue in 2 ways. If I was, I'm a nobody, but if I was running a track or something, and it's always easier to do from outside that realm, I would probably do it in 2 ways. I think I would, every analyst on your telecast, everybody analyzing the race, anybody employed by your track has to be on the page of informing the public what the race is. This race and elimination. They're not going to park each other out. They're not going to kill each other. Bettors know, any bettor knows something is a prep. They know, an injury-riddled game in the playoffs before a playoff game. A game that's meaningless in the playoffs before, we can figure this out. Everybody can figure it out. We're big boys and girls. But analyzing it in that vein, not this is the best horse, but this is the best horse probably on this day because this guy might not try too hard. I think that's important to do and share with your customer base. The second thing I do is the connections need to be interviewed before the race. You're promoting $1 million race. You're promoting a Breeders' Crown race. You're promoting the face of the sport. So, asking Joe Holloway, what's your plan? And he might say, well, we want that post position. We want to be in 1 through 6. We don't want to get saddled with a 10 going for $700,000. We got to make sure this horse is put in the race. We can handicap that then. He's not going to the back. If somebody else says, well, they're going to get out of there pretty hard. My horse had a bad one last week. I'd like to, make sure we qualify as the name of the game. Then we can handicap that. But I think all horses in elimination should be asked what their intentions are, how they're coming into the race, and then give that in the program. The analysts can give that to the folks that are betting. I think it's just so important to be open and transparent with these things and then let the public figure it out.
Yeah, transparency is the key. Dean, a former Standardbred gambler who turned into a thoroughbred gambler a few years back indicated that thoroughbred players don't necessarily question the motivations of the starters, as they believe, because they race less, that if they're in the gate, they are in the gate to race. Do you agree with that?
For the most part, yes. They race pretty infrequently. When they're in to win, and trainers can pick the spot that they want. And if, and all the top trainers also, people talk about their gaudy win percentages like they're doing something wrong, or they're, juicing the horses or something. They're just picking spots where their horse is going to win because they want that high win percentage. So if these Chad Brown and Todd Pletcher are against each other and, they're both winning at 25 or 30%, they're in to go. I mean, they're not taking that week off. I think that's very true. We'll look at the Haskell this weekend. Hot Rod Charlie's had 5 starts. First start needed Derby points. You got to go. Second start, I think, was the Louisiana Derby. Of course he's going. It's a stakes race. He's got to have points. He goes. Third race is the Kentucky Derby. Of course he's going. Fourth race was the Belmont, going. Fifth race was the Haskell. His horse was put into the race. That horse was put into the race and out to win every single time. And there are 7 or 8 others in that race that he's raced this year that are all pedal to the metal. We have to go win. Not really like that. Look at our graduate legs. They're giving $50,000, and some of these horses weren't took a week off.
Right.
So I think that's really important. Thoroughbreds have one issue in thoroughbred racing that I hear about that is similar to harness racing, though, about this transparency, is our maidens. One thing we do, really well is our horses, qualify. They're charted professionally. We can watch race video. That's why, the controversy regarding stale dates and, horses not having to qualify is I'm so against that in harness racing, because we actually can watch the horses now. We can, we know if a horse is coming into a race pretty well. We can watch the qualifier, and we know the trainer. In thoroughbred racing, it's workouts can be suspectly charted, the numbers. Sometimes horses are mixed up. Some places don't even have, they're trained on a private farm. There's all kinds of problems with that. And I've got one friend that was an everyday thoroughbred player. He's left for a number of reasons for DFS, but that was one of his big reasons. Was he was the type of guy that would put $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 into literally every pick 5 or pick 6, especially carryovers. And he would spend piles and piles of money trying to hit things that the crowd isn't hitting. So he'd do a lot of the homework, and he would get thwarted by maiden because he'd try to handicap it and he just wasn't sure. He'd have to wait to see the board. You have to do things like that. And he got tired of that because it just wasn't transparent enough for him. So there are some things that are very similar in harness with what the average player goes through. But I think, you probably lost $1 million in handle a year from that fella, that sport, just based on the non-transparency of maidens. And harness racing, I think, does similar. We lose people when we're not transparent, when we're not, horses aren't going or different things happen that shouldn't, that are more inside than out. I think that can push people away.
Hey, Trey, did you have anything you wanted to throw in here?
Yeah, I really think it's very negative to think about a situation where a guy's not going, or he's going this week, or he's not going next week, or he may go today and he may not go. Listen, I know it goes on, but that's a very, very, very weird thought. I would hope everybody in the race was going, but if you got to start figuring out whether a guy plans to really try to win the race. If I were an owner and I had a driver on a horse, I'd want to go for as much money as possible and win the elimination.
May I interject here? I was a handicapper and a tip sheet publisher for 25 years, 30 years. Everything that I've ever done, I've never left the grandstand. The first question when I would look at the past performances in any harness race, I would have to question, what are the motivations here? Who is going and who is not? That is what any handicapper will think. That is why we no longer have the bettors that we used to have. And for the reasons that were stipulated, well, he'll stay in B1 forever. It's called milking the class. That's why we don't have them. At one point, Seth Rosenfeld, who was one of our, he came from Lana Lobel, and I asked him at one situation, because he switched from betting on Standardbreds to betting on Thoroughbreds. And I asked him, I said, well, now that you're betting on Thoroughbreds, do you think the same way we would in terms of motivation? Is that what the Thoroughbred handicappers think? He said, no, they don't question motivations. Why? Because the races matter more. Well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, but that's why, maybe they bet $4 million at the Meadowlands. What they bet well over $16 million at Monmouth, they probably would have bet $25 to $30 million at Saratoga. Way back when, I remember going to Aqueduct, and they bet, I think, $3.8 million that day. I went to Yonkers that night, and they bet $2.5 million. That's a very small plurality. Today, it is an absolute landslide. And I think you got to ask that question, why? And I think basically, the motivation comes into it. That's why we don't have any handicappers or any bettors anymore, other than a handful. We used to have thousands because, yes, they got tired. I personally got tired of playing psychiatrist, trying to decide, what are his motivations?
I understand.
I'm going to bring Dean back in here. He is our guest this week. Dean, you have some input here?
Oh, great conversation. Conversations had around grandstands, Bob. Bob certainly, echoes what I hear. It is part of the game, so you do have to decipher the intentions of that barn on that day or of that driver on that day. I'll give you an example. Of Mohawk. Driver motivation is different among the catch drivers. I picture you've got a driver, say a leading driver, Filion, or in the States it would be T-Trick or somebody. But let's say you have that driver's on a long shot from a bad post, say 9 post, 25 to 1. And then the next race he's got an 8 to 5. The next race he's got an 8 to 5. Well, if they scurry out a little bit out of the gate, it's just, I don't even want to drive this horse. I'll take this horse to the back. I'm not saying these guys aren't competitive. They all want to win races, but it's just the thrill of getting into that horse into the race isn't really there when you're driving great horses all the time. But you put a guy down, and an example I give that a couple of my friends laugh at me at, he's an older guy, Mike Safdie, an old, good driver. He drove some horses, he's got 5,000 wins or 7,000 wins or something. But Mike will often put horses in play from the outside at big odds, just because. And he's driven for us a couple times, and he'll always be, hey, what can we do to win this race? He's very enthusiastic. He doesn't get a lot of drives. Well, Saturday night, I'm looking at the race, and I said, Mike's one guy that will put this horse into the race. It was a 24 to 1 shot. And I said, I have to use this horse in the pick 6, pick 5, and pick 4. And I'm sure he's going to leave because I didn't know the way the guy thinks. He just likes to compete. And sure enough, he leaves, gets down to the half and 54. Favorite comes up to him on the outside, and he ends up holding on. That horse really likes the lead, too. So, you can see this horse rolling if they gave him a try. And a lot of those guys do that. So you have to handicap that, but he'll do that a lot and clunk up a try or a super. So I use him 25, 30 to 1. He'll leave, sit a 3-hole with a horse that's 21. So I think it's a combination of a number of factors. Bob, you mentioned the intent. I don't think these drivers say, I want to lose this race or anything. I don't think it's sinister or anything like that. It's just sometimes the driving colony's cliquish, the ABC, the classification system is what it is, where drop and pops happen. I think there's just a number of factors. And I think if we had more owners, more owner breadth, we didn't have big barns having so many that, have to work the classification system. More competitive racing with 10 different owners and 10 different drivers, not just the top 4 or 5 getting all the live ones. I think it's just a combination of things that makes the game more predictable. And when you make your game more predictable, handle leaves. It just, takeout's too high. So if you're 20% takeout and you've got a predictable game, you can't grow handle because there's no meat on the bone. I talked to somebody that's part of the ADW world and does statistics as an independent consultant that I talk with about racing quite a bit. He mentioned the other day he had heard from an ADW that your average fan, this is just your average fan, loses 14% more than the takeout. So if your average takeout blended right now is about 21%, it means your average fan is losing more than one out of every $3 they bet. That's a very unsustainable game. So the game has to get better to attract more money. They have to win more money. And it's hard to do with strong favorites in a predictable game.
Correct. If you're buying or selling your home, Joe Rico is your go-to guy. Joe has been representing buyers and sellers on Long Island for 30 years. He is an expert in all types of sales. Don't settle for average. Call or text Joe Rico today at 516-524-4870. That's Joe Rico at 516-524-4870.
Freddie, you got his email address?
Yes, I do. That's Joe Rico, C21@yahoo.com. And that pretty much brings us to the close of this week's show. Dean, I want to thank you so much for being on our broadcast. This is Freddie Hudson signing off, and thanks for listening, and have a great week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show